Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Be Remote Podcast. I'm your host Pushpak. For today's episode, we have with us Joe Giglio. Joe is the creator of Gold Puppy, Remote Scorecard, and Remote Work Masterclass. He's the author of Making Remote Work for You, and currently he's working as an engineering manager at Nomad. Welcome to the show, Joe. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Pushpak. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So let us begin with your introduction about yourself. Yeah.
Sure. I've been in the internet space since the mid 90s. I started my career doing tech support for a dial-up ISP, if you remember what that is. Not sure how old you are. Since then, I've worked for a bunch of startups, and my expertise is really in ticketing software, help desk software, call center, CRM software. And I've worked remotely in some respect for most of my career. I've been a manager and director building support, QE, and engineering teams. And in my last role, I was the first hire for another startup named Assistly. And we were one of Zendesk's main competitors, and we got acquired by Salesforce. I stayed with Salesforce for about 9 or 10 years. I stayed with them until the end of that project. And I ended up leaving Salesforce. The company was really not remote friendly at the time. And they really wanted leadership out on the west of the US. They really wanted people in San Francisco. I was about to move, so we parted ways. And even though Salesforce really didn't like remote work at the time, I had worked remotely for quite a while, and I decided to publish a book and a video series on remote work. And I was starting to see a lot of traction online on Twitter, LinkedIn. A lot more people were becoming remote work advocates. There were a handful of companies out there that were building remote first cultures. They were publishing books, publishing blogs, and teaching other companies how to do it. So I decided I would try to do the same thing. Like I said, published a book, published a video series. I got into a little remote work consulting. And then I created a couple of applications to hopefully improve the remote work culture. Anybody who wants links to any of my projects, you can find them on chiefremoteofficer.com. And as you mentioned, next week I'm starting a new role at Nomad Health, and I'll be starting there as an engineering manager.
Awesome, sounds amazing. So, what made you build and create this multiple products in remote space? Like you are the creator of Gold Puppy and all these things.
Sure. Yeah, the two projects that I recently built, one is called Remote Scorecard, the other one is called Gold Puppy. And as someone who's worked in challenging environments, I'm trying to create applications, education material to try to improve the remote work experience. I am yet to work for a company that is truly remote first. I've worked in companies that maybe didn't really love remote work, but we had to make it work. And I had my team was scattered all over the country, if not all over the world. So I have a lot of experience building highly functional teams in environments where maybe remote is really not preferred, but I know how to make it work. So my book and my masterclass video series were really just a brain dump of all the knowledge I had picked up over the years, in combination of some of the best practices from those great remote first companies like GitLab and Zapier and Help Scout, and TaxJar. These are companies that have been publishing blogs on how to do remote first long before anybody else was even doing it. My other project was Remote Scorecard, and the point of that project is remote work, I've come to learn, is really a spectrum. What I mean by that is, to some companies, remote work might be that you work from home maybe a day or two a week. Other companies, maybe you work remotely from a satellite office. Other companies really push you to the extreme, and you have people backpacking across Europe or working from the rim of a volcano, or living on cruise ships or living in RVs, and there's people that are working and very productive in those environments.
Yeah, yeah.
So the point of remote work is I found that the best remote companies follow about a dozen workflows and criteria to build a great remote culture. So if you go to Remote Scorecard and add your company, there's about 15 or so questions. You submit the form, and an algorithm will give your company a remote score based on some of those key criteria and workflows.
Okay.
Okay, and Goal Puppy is my other recent project, and what I've learned is it can be challenging for managers to build relationships and trust with their team members. This is especially true on remote teams.
Yeah.
You might never meet your team. You might meet them maybe once or twice a year. And this is coming from somebody who has managed remotely and also had remote managers. So the point of Goal Puppy is to work with your manager and your team to create your goals and collaborate and try to increase alignment and trust between management and the workers. And some of the challenges typically faced by remote workers is they might feel like their career is stalled. They're seeing a lack of advancement, lack of recognition, lack of relationships in the company. And when you're a remote worker, sometimes you don't really feel like part of a company. So you should work on goals that are time-based and work with your manager to collaborate to come up with goals that are clear and time and date driven. And that's the point of Goal Puppy.
Okay, awesome. So as we are talking about, building trust and building good relationship with employees. So how do, as a manager, how do we build better relationships and trust with our employees?
Oh, a lot of it really starts with proper onboarding.
Right.
One of the things that I did while I was at Salesforce was I built part of the onboarding program for anybody that was joining the project I was working on. And this was a week long deep dive into the company history, meet the key people, meet product management, do system administration on our products, understand the product roadmap, work with the support team. And that really helped people to get a great foundation into what the company did, how the products worked, how customers use the product. And I think a good solid foundation like that really helps people feel like part of the company. A lot of times your head's down writing code and you lose sight of what the company is really working on. And I think a nice, an immersive onboarding program like that will help set the foundation for your workers to make them feel like part of something and break them out of their bubble a little bit. I think that's pretty important. I'm also an advocate of what I'll call mentors and milestones. Again, part of that onboarding is to have a couple of mentors in the company. You should have a couple of mentors, and the mentors will be people that are in the company that can help you get things done in the company. They might not be on your immediate team. It's actually better if they're not always on your immediate team. And these would be people that can help you navigate the company, figure out how to get things done. I think that's pretty important. And having date-driven milestones is also pretty important to build on that alignment.
Right. It makes sense because I think I have observed this in a lot of companies. Like when someone new is joining, they are mostly clueless. They don't know what to do because of, most of the companies don't have good onboarding process. That's what I felt. Yeah. So
I've seen a lot of onboarding is basically a lot of onboarding is focused on just setting up your laptop and setting up your development environment. And that's part of it, obviously. But the onboarding that I've seen work be very effective is more of a deep dive into the company, the culture, and meeting more people. Right. And that's especially important, I think, for remote workers where, like I said, you might not ever get a chance to meet everybody, or you might meet them once a year. So I think it's very important to get that foundation set early if you can.
Yeah. So tell us about your book. So you have written this book in 2019, right? So at the time, pandemic like was about to start, or wasn't even started in West and other countries. So it wasn't even that mainstream, right? So what made you come up with this book, and tell us more about the book?
Sure. I think the first edition, I believe, was published at the very end of 2019 after I left Salesforce. And like I mentioned, I was starting to see a lot of traction online, a lot more remote work advocacy, and a handful of companies that were really doing remote work the right way. So this was a brainstorm, like I mentioned earlier, of things that helped me build successful remote teams, and a combination of best practices from some really great remote first companies. So I published that in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and you had a lot of companies that were forced into remote work situations and just trying to figure out how to survive. So I moved that into trying to do more remote work consulting, and then I moved into the companion video series called the Remote Work Masterclass. And what I try to teach in the book and my masterclass is an honest assessment of remote work, the benefits and the challenges, and there are some very real challenges.
Yeah.
So I go through that in my teachings, and I also that remote work spectrum, like I mentioned earlier. It's very important, I think, for companies and job seekers to really be honest about what they're offering in a remote role and what they want in a remote role. Are you okay? Like I said in my examples before, you work from home on Friday. Is that good enough? Maybe it is. It saves on your commute, saves on your mileage, gives you back a few hours a week. Or do you really want to push it to the opposite extreme and be a true digital nomad?
Yeah.
You don't know where you're gonna work from next week, and in some companies it doesn't matter. You work asynchronously, so where and when you work doesn't matter, as long as you can continue to be productive and have your company's support. So I also focus on that in my teachings. You need to be honest how far you want to push remote work, and how supportive will your company be.
Right. Got it. So as you mentioned about asynchronous communication, so let's talk about it. Why do you think it's important, and why companies should adapt to it if they haven't?
Well, like I always say, I really think it's the only sane way to try to work across challenging time zones. One of the advantages of remote work is that you can really build a truly global team that works 24 hours a day. But communication is very challenging. Obviously, you don't want people taking meetings in the middle of the night and having their days and nights constantly disrupted. So, with asynchronous communication, it's more documentation based. It's not real time, and it really helps if you have a global team. It allows greater flexibility in where and when you work. As I mentioned before, depending on your role, you might be a true digital nomad, and you might really not have a set home address. And through asynchronous communication, you can actually support that and still be successful. I've heard it said that office environments reward people with the loudest voice. And asynchronous communication is a great equalizer, and it allows everyone to gather their thoughts and write them intelligently. And reading and writing are really remote work superpowers. So instead of just rewarding somebody that's very comfortable speaking with a loud voice, it lets people digest the document, ask questions in the document, and really gather their thoughts intelligently and put them in the doc. For companies that are looking to become successfully, they should really have a policy where everybody works as if they are remote to try to level the playing field. You don't want second-class citizens on your team, people that feel like they're remote and they're treated differently. That's not a good situation to be in.
Yeah.
If you've ever worked as a remote member of a team where everybody else is working from an office, there's always side conversations in the conference room and the just advantages of people working together in a room while you're working remotely from Zoom or a conference call. It's a different feel. So everybody should really work as if they are remote. I think that helps to build rapport and, like I said, level the playing field. And I think a lot of established companies really struggle with this because they have people and they have teams that have worked the old way, and it was fine for years. And now they don't want to all take. They don't want to sit in an office, for example, and take video calls at their desk when they're used to being in a conference room.
Yeah.
So companies and people really struggle with this. And even though I am obviously an advocate of asynchronous work, there are some roles that it might not really work for. I've had some salespeople, for example, tell me that they really enjoy working from an office. They like to be with their team.
Yeah.
They enjoy the energy and the buzz of a sales team. And you don't get that, obviously, working with your headphones on from home.
Totally.
The support team, for example, the support team might need a protocol for relations. If they have something urgent that's burning, putting it in a dock and waiting a few hours might not be good enough. So you might have to have protocols for escalations. And asynchronous is obviously it is slow, or it's more deliberate. But I think because of that, it really lets people, like I said before, really gather their thoughts and their questions in this document. So if you do have something where time is of the essence, then set deadlines and open the document for comments and Q&A. And I think it's important to remember that even if you are asynchronous first, it doesn't mean some people get tripped. I never need any meetings. I never need a call. That's not true, and I don't think it'll ever really be true. You need the best protocol for the situation. Sometimes you need a phone call. Sometimes you need a video call. Sometimes you need to meet in person.
Yeah.
But you can default to asynchronous first and make an adjustment as needed. But it's not realistic to say, oh, we'll never have any meetings. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, makes sense. So what advice you would give to startup who are facing challenges in getting remote cultures right? And I think a lot of companies are facing this challenge.
Well, I think some startups now are growing up during the COVID era, and they'll have remote work in their DNA. They'll have an advantage that they don't have any expensive real estate. They don't have any executives that they have to convince to get into remote work. So I think right now I'm seeing small startups definitely have an advantage over larger established companies when it comes to building remote culture.
Right, yeah.
It's important to try to establish expectations around communication. A brand new company with a new product might need to be in constant communication. While companies with established products, maybe you're fixing bugs, maybe you're adding small features, might not need to have that constant communication. So you can do more of the asynchronous first stuff as opposed to needing a lot of meetings, making sure everybody's in sync. I would say you also want to try to hire people that you know, maybe from previous remote roles that have been successful, or maybe those with an independent entrepreneurial spirit. I've heard it said from a couple of companies that you want to try to hire what they call managers of one. And that's typically going to be people that don't need a lot of hand-holding, don't need a lot of guidance. They can just come in and do the work and be independent. And as you're building your team, you want to keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that some engineers are not great communicators. They might struggle with async. They might struggle with documentation. So don't hire only for technical skills if you really need them to do more, especially as technology leaders in your company. I have found that a lot of engineers, like I said, might not be great communicators, but they are good developers and good engineers. As you look for tech leads, though, communication becomes very important. So you want to make sure that you're hiring not just for tech skills, but also communication. And some of the top challenges that I keep seeing out there are, as we mentioned, challenges with time zones and executive attitudes. Sometimes leadership just doesn't want remote work, and if that's the case, it's a never-ending challenge for remote work to ever be successful.
Right.
And if you are hiring, you'll find that north-south hiring be easier because of time zones. So what I mean by that is if you're in the US, maybe you can expand your team maybe into Canada, into Central and South America, because the time zones won't be as bad as opposed to being into the US and maybe hiring into Europe or Australia, for example. Some of those time zones can be pretty challenging to navigate for a new company.
Mhm. So actually, I wanted to ask you more about the book. So I kind of missed that. Like, how many days, like months, it took you to, write the book, and like, how was your entire experience of writing a book? And is it your first book, or you have written more books earlier as well?
Yeah, that was my first and only book. It was really more of a brainstorm than anything. It's a Kindle book, so it's self-published. Really not that intense. It probably took me a couple of weeks just to get all my thoughts down and try to get them arranged.
Okay,
Then it was published as a Kindle book on Amazon.
awesome. So what are your top three learnings you had while building Goal Puppy and Remote Scorecard? And yeah.
That's a good question. I think, well, what I've learned is that even with a good product, getting your earliest customers can take some time and be pretty frustrating. I think as engineers, we spend a lot of time in the code, and we assume what customers want, and we want to release a good product, and then you release it, and it takes a while to get any traction and to get any traffic, and it can be pretty frustrating. So I think your network of people matters more than a polished product at first. So what I think a lot of people have learned now is before publishing the product, try to build anticipation for it with on social media. Try to get an email list. Try to get some followers that are interested in what you're building. A lot of products, once they're ready for launch, they launch on a site called Product Hunt. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and I think it's important to get friendly with someone who has a following on Product Hunt,
Right.
that can, what they call, hunt your product, which is basically an endorsement of your product,
Yeah.
and try to get people interested in it that way, because getting your initial batch of customers can be pretty slow going.
Yeah.
Number two, I would say, I think traffic and content matter more than a perfect UI. I know some people try to get each pixel perfect, and they really worry about the UI a lot more than the content and customers on the site. I would say number three is try not to get caught up with long debates on technology languages, scalability. It's really more important to build something, even if it's raw. Try to get feedback, validate what you've built, and then iterate on that. If you have scalability issues, maybe that's good news. It validates your application. It validates what you've written. And I think you could always work on those problems. I don't think you should spend that much time initially trying to figure out scalability before your product has ever been proven as an idea. Those would be my three things.
Yeah. Amazing. So, what are your top three favorite books which you would recommend to like people working remotely or like in general?
All right. First one I would say is a book called The Year Without Pants.
Okay.
And this was published way back in 2013, which somehow is 8, 9 years ago now.
Mhm.
And this book documents Automatic, who are the creators of WordPress.
Oh,
And
okay.
these are one of the grandparents of the modern remote work movement.
Yeah.
And again, let's remember how long ago this was. This company was letting people work remotely long before most companies were letting you take a half day to go to the doctor, for example. So
Yeah.
so in this book they document automatics remote first culture, which was very for the time, and then since
Mhm.
then obviously a lot of companies have caught on, but for the time was very innovative. The second book I'd say is not really related to remote work, but it's the Rich Dad Poor Dad series.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you've ever read any of these, but they're
Yeah.
interesting books that they really help get your head on straight about topics like money and business, taxes, and entrepreneurship.
Mhm.
Um, that's grown into a whole series of books that I highly recommend to anybody that is interested in trying to take more control of your finances.
Great.
I would say number three, there's a series called Joel on Software. These are written by Joel Spolsky,
Mhm.
and they're about 15 years old now, which is pretty old in the technology world. But some of the advice in these books is pretty timeless on software development. He doesn't write about remote work, but he was writing about back when everybody was spending a lot of money on offices.
Mhm.
Um, he was talking about embracing private offices, giving everybody an office with a door and a lock, more privacy, less interruptions.
Mhm.
This was again innovative for the time when everybody was trying to push everybody to work from one big open room that was hot for several years, and he was pushing against that because he was a believer that for anybody doing knowledge work, you need to, as he says, get in the zone. And
Mhm.
when you interrupt somebody, it takes quite a while to get back into the zone. So he
Yeah.
was a big advocate for letting people have private time and private space to really do a deep dive on their work. So I'm
Mhm.
a big believer in that. And then I would say the team from Basecamp, they have a couple of really good books, Rework, Remote, and It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. Those were three of their books. And they built Basecamp as a company that was always remote, and they preach building a company that's bootstrapped. They never took investment money. They believe in a calm workplace, and they believe you can build a nice small company by just solving your own problems and make an application out of it. Sell
Mhm.
it for a reasonable price, and you'll build a loyal customer base and a sustainable income. And they say that business is not war. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that competitive. Everybody can eat.
Mhm.
There's room for everybody, and you don't need growth at all costs. So they believe in building a calm, profitable company that doesn't owe anything to anyone. And I think that's a really solid approach.
Yeah, this makes sense. I think I'll read this book. This is like really seems like very insightful. So, any folks in remote work that you admire for their contribution, to making remote work better for the world?
Yeah, I'll throw a couple of names out there. Chris Hurd, I don't know if you follow him on
Yeah, yeah.
Twitter or LinkedIn, but he's a CEO of a company called First Base,
Mhm.
and he's single-minded in focus and very, very persistent in his messaging on remote work advocacy.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think he's been pushing the remote work message probably stronger than anybody for the last 2 years. And he's been pretty successful with it. I think he's had write-ups in a couple of major publications as well. So
Yeah.
I'd like to give a nod to him. Second would be Darren Murph. I believe he's the I think the title is head of remote. He's from GitLab, and he's somebody else that always seems to be everywhere at once. You always see his name in articles and in publications. And GitLab is one of these companies that they recently became a public company, which means that you can buy stock in them. And I think they are the largest all remote public company out there. And they're one of these companies that really preaches about asynchronous communication, and everything should be documented. And they have a lot of public documentation on their site. And you can always find Darren Murph writing about their remote work culture, and they're pretty interesting to follow. And then I just want to give a nod again to the leadership team at Basecamp. Their books have been pretty eye-opening on how to build a great remote culture, but not just remote culture, how to run a business that's calm and sane. And I know Jason Fried has posted a couple of times. He's posted a screenshot of his calendar, and I know a lot of executives and even non-executives at work, their calendar is just overflowing with meeting after meeting. Well, he shows his screenshot of his calendar, and maybe he has one meeting a week, if that. So this is a very, again, successful, calm company, and I really admire what they've built and what they've tried to teach the rest of us.
That's nice. Like, it might take a lot of efforts to do that. Like, as a leader and having a one meeting a week, that is, maybe it works, differs from company to company, or maybe they have built this kind of things. Yeah. So what are you into outside of your work? What you do when you're not working?
Well, I am into investing. I like to play the stock market. I'm into real estate investing.
Oh, nice.
I can speak for a while about investing on stock options, calls, and puts. I'm self-taught in that. Some years obviously are better than others, but I find investing very interesting. I think people in the older generations were probably taught to save their money, and now I think what we've grown over the years is don't save it because of inflation. Invest it and build assets. And I've been experimenting with that. I'm into a barbecue and grilling meat. That's very interesting to me. I'm into dogs. I love my dogs. I have 3 dogs right now, and I also I play the drums.
Oh, awesome!
Yep.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Joe. It was really great talking to you, and I think we got a lot of insights about remote culture, building remote teams, also about building remote projects, and the books that you recommended and the people that you recommended. Like they're like, I think, really important, that they are also giving amazing insights, and people should like really follow them as well. And I think we can reach out to you on Twitter, right? Like our audience.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter. My handle on there is Chief Remote. You can find me on LinkedIn under Joe Giglio from North Carolina. And if you want an easy link to all my projects, you can find that on chiefremoteofficer.com. And there's also a web form on there if you just wanted to send me an email. And I'm always looking to meet and collaborate with quality people. So please reach out if you would like to work on any projects.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you.